Can you guys see this?
Yes. Yeah, we see it. Thanks.
Sweet.
Yeah, maybe you can also just short if you have any connection to this project, or if it's just out of curiosity. Or
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, we do have some exposure to Maple Finance as a fund. And also, I met Sid in Lisbon, actually. We ended up overlapping at tons of different events. So I ended up getting closer to the team. But as a fund, we also have exposure in like TrueFi and also in Goldfinch as well. And these three are kind of like the main protocols that are debt protocols going for under collateralized lending. So I don't think we have like a particular bias to any one of these right now. Just because we have like exposure indexing all three of them, but I can go into this one specifically because I think it's pretty cool.
okay, thanks.
Yeah. So yeah, as I mentioned, within crypto capital markets, this is under collateralized loans for institutions, primarily. And I don't know how familiar you guys are with Maple Finance, but basically the way you'd use it is you can browse the lending pools on Maple, choose a lending pool based on its performance. You can deposit USDC so that it'll be lent out by like pool delegators, and then you would be earning interest rate rewards plus governance token rewards. And the lending pool funds loans to top crypto institutions that are all KYC'd as well. So that was like a quick summary, but I'll go into every one of these components and then eventually my recommendation for what we should do as Aladdin as well.
Yes.
So for the first part, there's lenders. So the lenders are people who want to lend out their USDC. So they earn a yield from a diversified pool of institutional loans. In summary, here's for example how the different pools look. So you can see that, you know, within these pools, there's a pool balance, a cash balance, and you can see that there are pool delegates managing these as well. There's like an APY associated with them, but basically this is the interface that you look at if you're looking to lend on Maple Finance. So the way the lending APYs work is you would deposit USDC into the lending pool, and you'd get MPT tokens, which are the pool tokens for the lending pool. And then you can also deposit those MPT tokens to earn additional Maple rewards as well. So it's like two layers of yield there strung out, which I'll separate in a future slide, which makes up the high APYs that Maple has today. Here are some of the different lenders on the platform right now. You guys would probably recognize a lot of these names. And it's not just, you know, funds that are lenders on the platform. There's also just regular, like, you know, democratized lenders, regular users, in addition to these players. But these players are known to be farming on the platform today. So when these lenders lend money, you know, they're not lending it directly to institutions themselves. They have to go through this party called a pool delegate. And the pool delegate earns yield from a diversified pool of institutional loans by crowdsourcing the capital to lend out. So you can think of it, if you're familiar with like the AngelList model, these are like the syndicate leads. They like bring the lending deal flow, they do the underwriting on their end, and in exchange, they have people that are willing to lend them money in order for them to lend out, kind of like Goldfinch's model, but they earn essentially carry on their successful loaning. So yeah, they, in summary, they manage lending pools, attracting capital, and then they provide funding to borrowers. In addition, they're responsible for like negotiating on loan terms, doing the diligence. So for example, in TrueFi's case, they don't have a delegated system right now. TrueFi does themselves like all of the underwriting, but within Goldfinch's case, they have a similar model where there are delegates that are the intermediaries that take on the burden of negotiating terms with borrowers and doing all the diligence, which is like a more scalable model in the long run, where the people are incentivized to be like diligent, like pool delegates. Otherwise, they would have no upside from managing this money. So yeah, I just wanted to circle where you could see like who's the delegate for any given loan. You could also see it at the bottom, who specifically is the delegate, but every single pool is tied to a delegate right now on the platform. And here are the 3 delegates that they have right now. I think they actually just announced that Alameda launched their pool too today. So you could slap Alameda's logo alongside these guys as well. Yeah, and then the last part of the equation, apart from the lenders and the pool delegates, is the borrowers themselves. So these are, institutional borrowers that are borrowing fully on chain, and they're fully KYC'd as well. So the borrowers can use their reputation to borrow under collateralized loans without fear of like liquidation or margin calls. And the reason why they're doing it like primarily to like institutional and corporate borrowers today is because it's pretty hard to do under collateralized lending. I mean, for the most part, everything we've seen in crypto is over collateralized lending, which is like, capital inefficient because within the real world, everything is basically under collateralized lending. But it's kind of hard to translate to crypto because you'd be like prone to Sybil attacks if you just did it like fully anonymously, or like, people wouldn't like repay those loans. But if you do like the whole KYC process today, it's like, the V1 of under collateralized lending. In the future, there might be like, reputation protocols or other like ways to understand the credit score of a protocol, or like, DAO income streaming to loan repayments, which could like also de-risk loans and like potentially allow for under collateralized lending to exist more so. Also, like more primitives would probably have to be built out, like credit default swaps and other things that have been conceptualized in the past but haven't really had a place to have a product market fit. But once under collateralized lending is more accessible outside of the world of institutional borrowers, I think a lot of the infrastructure there would have to be built out, mirroring what's built out in traditional capital markets. But yeah, right now the borrowers are just like hedge funds, prop traders, market makers, exchanges, centralized lenders, crypto miners, and scale ups. It's pretty hard for like, a hedge fund to go to their bank and tell them that they want to borrow a bunch of money to throw it in a risk neutral strategy today. But these sorts of like on-chain lenders have been built around this sort of value prop to begin with. So they're fully equipped and ready to provide these sorts of loans. Yeah, and then here are the existing borrowers today. So you have Wintermute, one of the biggest market makers, Alameda, Amber, which is like one of the biggest like OTC desks as well today, and a bunch of other players too. And as for the strategy that I'd recommend for Aladdin, we can lend money to experienced pool delegates in exchange for interest payments and Maple governance tokens, averaging between 25 to 28% APY from the existing pools that they have on the website. Here's just like an example of how quickly like Maple has grown. It launched in May with like around 17 million of loans initially on the platform. But since like October, November, it's been growing at like a pretty rapid pace. Like in October, it like hit 200 million, November it hit 300 million. And it's been making some pretty crazy announcements. I think this morning with Alameda, it launched like a $25 million pool as well, and which would bring the TVL probably around like 340 million now, but I'd have to go check. They have been growing at like a pretty impressive pace though. So the APYs here, yeah, they're like broken out into the investment APY from the interest rates paid by borrowers and Maple governance token rewards. And the reason why this is interesting is because the APY in governance token rewards is like calculated at like today's Maple market cap. But if the price of Maple tokens went up in the future, then the effective APY realized would have been a lot higher than the APY quoted here. So if you believe that like under collateralized lending would increase as an asset class in terms of market size, and you were to take this sort of position, then if like Maple 5x's in the future, theoretically, then like the Maple yield portion of this would have been closer to 95%, and in addition to the 9% interest, whenever you do cash out the loan, depending on if the protocol price goes up. That's kind of the benefit of like mining tokens that are in your like thesis undervalued governance tokens, because if you're right about them being undervalued today and they end up increasing in value tomorrow and you're farming them with like relatively neutral strategies, then you'd be having a lot more upside in the future if you're right. So yeah, comparing him to TrueFi, which is I guess the biggest player within under collateralized lending, you can see that Maple has roughly 1/3 of the loans of TrueFi, a bit less than 1/3 of the market cap, a very similar fully diluted value to TVL ratio. It kind of looks like that the market is valuing TVL similarly across all of these sorts of players today. So you can expect that if the TVL of Maple were to go up and the ratio would be still similar to TrueFi, then the fully diluted value would go up proportionally as well, which is pretty beneficial to our thesis of the lending APY could potentially be higher if governance tokens are appreciated in the future. And as I mentioned, also the main difference between Maple and TrueFi's underwriting and scaling model is that Maple has these pool delegates that are incentivized to have successful pools and raise their own capital and source their own deal flow, whereas TrueFi does all of the underwriting in-house. That's like today, TrueFi might change their model in the near future, but Maple has been using this model to date. In addition to Goldfinch, I know I didn't put Goldfinch here. Goldfinch has around $40 million in loans originated. They don't have a token out yet, but they also have like pretty high APYs, though their pools are always like pretty full. Maple though has like seemingly more openness for capital to flow into it, and I think it has a lot of potential upside in the future. So yeah, in summary, like the pros and cons of like Maple is, the pros are the TVL is growing really quickly because of the scalable underwriting model, and pool delegates are like a great scalability model to not having to insource underwriting and negotiations of deals. It's also more decentralized in that way in comparison to like TrueFi. The category is growing a lot. I think that, under collateralized lending within the real world is like a significant portion of all of the flow within the finance world. Whereas right now, if you were to add up the enterprise value of every single party operating in under collateralized loans, it's probably like 3 to 4 billion in size relative to like the $3 trillion market cap of crypto today. So definitely hasn't found any real category market fit because a lot of infrastructure still has to be built out. But in general, I do expect for the tailwinds to push these projects forward, moving forward. It's also not like, traditional like stablecoin depegging risk that you'd be taking on, but instead it's more of a lending risk. And the lending risk, it is a real risk, but the pool delegate system incentivizes people to make smart decisions. Otherwise, they wouldn't make money with their delegate pools. So in a way, you're kind of, trusting that the pool delegates are lending their money, with the idea of making money on top of it, instead of just like giving it out without doing proper diligence on the commitments that they'd be making. But with that risk aside, the APYs look pretty good. And the cons, I mean, I know that the token design for Maple hasn't really changed since launch, and they're considering making some changes, but there isn't too much you could do with the token right now. Theoretically, there could be like a governance proposal tomorrow that, would like offer Maple holders like the fees that are earned on the platform. Right now, the main way of using the Maple token is if you're like setting up your own pool as a delegate, you'd have to stake a certain amount of Maple tokens. And there's also ways to like make some staking rewards on Maple tokens, but they'd have to like definitely flesh out that model better, similar to Aladdin DAO, in order to make it a lot more lucrative for the users. And also one of the bigger cons is that borrowers are not really brand loyal when it comes to like borrowing from under collateralized lending players. They kind of just care about the rates and terms of the deal. So it is kind of a race to get to, the ideal like economies of scale / like rehypothecation of scale that would allow for, shorter term, relatively more under collateralized loans to be given out to parties, which would be better terms for borrowers in the future. So yeah, that's my presentation on Maple, and open to any questions.